Okay.
Great. So we're live with our next panel, Scaling Web3. As you can see, it is an awesome panel. Amazing that we've got these three people today with us, especially since I think Sergey, it's 2:30 a.m. in the morning for him. He's on the West Coast and on no coffee. And then the other half of the panel, I'm in Europe, and the other half of the panel are in the East. So that is a truly global panel at work. I think the three of these people need no introduction. So we're just going to go straight into the meat of the questions. So scaling Web3 is obviously a complex topic and can be discussed from several different angles. Really, my aim here is to understand how we can begin to mainstream Web3 from people that are making that happen from slightly different angles. I know each are at slightly different stages, but each to me represent how we can onboard different stakeholder groups, whether that's users coming into it from an asset perspective versus developers. So the first thing I want to start with is around mindshare. Often this is kind of regarded as a soft thing. How do we build a narrative that attracts people into the space? But I think is an area where the industry suffers the most challenges. So CZ, you're onboarding God knows how many new users every month in over 80 different countries now. What is the narrative that they're buying into, and is it localized, or is there something universal there?
I think from the data we can see, it's relatively universal right now. I think from the trend perspective, I think US is picking up quite aggressively, but other countries as well, Asia countries, especially like China, other both developed and non-developed countries are picking up. I think we're not doing that much. I think it's really the overall economy or the overall economic situation that's helping us to get users now.
So COVID is additive to people looking for a kind of hedge against the existing financial system.
Pretty much. I think, yeah, the COVID causes everyone to stay home, and they go, and then the government is printing lots of money. I think all of those things are contributing to people wanting cryptocurrencies, and we're one of the platforms that offer it. So I think that there's little things like user experience, ease of use, and also, customer support. I think we try to differentiate within the industry, but I think we're seeing that most cryptocurrency exchanges have high volumes now. So I think that the rising tide raises all boats. We're kind of feeling that now. Yeah.
Good to hear. So Illia, you use the term when I've spoken to you in the past, the open web, not Web3, not crypto. To what extent is the crypto narrative versus these alternatives helpful, or and to what extent is crypto a point of friction in winning mindshare with developers?
I think. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, for developers, actually, crypto has like a pretty bad cryptocurrencies has a bad connotation from like 2017, and on the other side, there's been a actually over 10 years of a movement of open web. So it's not a new thing, and really, it's like Mozilla been spearheading it, and even Google at some point was actually leading that. It was like trying to free web from Flash. So a lot of it is actually like latching on existing bigger trends that developers do want to kind of free from, like platforms that are controlling kind of what they can do, and really gives them tools and give the opportunity to build, new products that are not limiting and not will not pull the rug out from themselves, right? And the cryptocurrency and like blockchain is just technologies that maybe power it, but it's not. It should not be the like top narrative that people like. We're not talking about I built a database app, right? And we're not talking about it's a dollar application, right? Like we're not talking about like tools that we use for payments or for storage as what defines application. Like what should be defining it is like what functions and use cases it brings to the user. And Open Web has like a way cleaner like messaging around that, like, hey, this is like about opening up, giving self-sovereignty to users and like connecting things in a different way.
So Sergey, I know that you're the kind of some of the traction that you're building is now spilling out from just what you would class as the kind of crypto native industry. You're as you would hope and expect through Oracle's bridging into the real world, and you're starting to gain a lot of adoption in an enterprise context. So how are you kind of cutting through with that audience? How are you convincing them that they need to be migrating workflows and anything else into this space?
Yeah, I mean, there's generally three categories of users when it comes to making a fully connected end-to-end secure contract. There's the native crypto users who want to give their end users guarantees that their contract is properly secured from what it's connected to the core, to whatever output system it has. Those divide between DeFi applications and applications that are dealing with crypto, like Celsius and other systems that aren't fully smart contract based but are on track to that. Enterprises are in a slightly different situation where they didn't build everything with crypto connected to begin with. So they have an existing infrastructure that manages billions and billions of dollars. Their concerns are actually slightly different than the straight DeFi and partially centralized applications that deal with cryptocurrency. Those partially centralized applications that deal with cryptocurrency, some of them are now growing into an enterprise-sized entity that uses oracles to provide additional guarantees. So some of those entities that started out in crypto but now have massively grown, they can use oracles to, for example, have better pricing. So they can show users that the pricing they had to settle some kind of futures contract or some lending for their basically crypto project that grew to a massive size can be improved on. So they can give more guarantees. So I'm seeing some of the crypto companies grow into real enterprises with real enterprise value because they have a huge user set with a lot of real value behind it. You know, Binance is a good example of that. They've grown massively and become a genuine, serious enterprise. Then there are enterprises who didn't start out in crypto and they're moving towards it. They basically need to connect to a lot of different chains. And some of them, sometimes that's geographically based. Sometimes that's just their users. They're sometimes multinational, and having one middleware that allows their systems to interact with all the different environments in which they want to conduct operations. In sometimes transactions overlap between environments. That's been one of the main ideas. So that instead of integrating on a chain by chain basis, they have a middleware that allows them to integrate with all the chains they want to utilize. And then the benefit there is that the chains that are integrated into Chainlink, they can get enterprise users onboarded much faster, because the capacity to connect the ERP system or whatever automated API-driven system into the 4 or 5 chains that they want to use across their multinational set of different business lines suddenly becomes easier. One of the places we've seen this work very well is for data providers. So data providers don't want to connect and build applications for 15 chains. They don't want a blockchain team of 5 people for each chain. They want one middleware that allows them to sell to all the chains that they want to sell into. So I think it's crypto firms becoming real enterprises and getting additional security guarantees from oracles that their users appreciate, because their users are sensitive to those types of guarantees. And then it's enterprises going towards blockchains and then having a middleware that allows them to connect to all the systems they want to connect to is a very efficient and kind of a faster way for them to get connected, which means they use those blockchains more. So it benefits them and it benefits the blockchains they plan to use.
Great. So Illia, I remember we spoke in the past, you mentioned that when you were training computers how to code,
yes,
thinking how you build a stack. that onboards the average developer into Web3, what are the kind of foundational building blocks Web3 stack? I mean, obviously you're building one instance of that, but more generally, what are those building blocks? And within those building blocks, are there any that are kind of Trojan horses that can kind of lead the horse?
Jimmy,
to the water,
I think we lost you. We can't hear you now.
You lost me? You got me again now?
Yeah, you're breaking out a little bit. But...
You hear me? Okay. The joys of virtual conferences. So sorry, I was saying that you've.
Is it just me or is Jamie sound not coming through?
It's coming from me.
It's coming. Okay, I think it's just for you, CZ. I'm going to ask again, and
we lost
if
our
not,
moderator.
I think you've kind of got the gist of the question. So basically, what are the building blocks of a Web3 stack? And specifically, are there any Trojan horses in there which we can almost trick developers to begin engaging with Web3?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, it's a definitely interesting question. And, people have been looking for like killer apps, and Trojan horse for developers is like another alternative for that. I think like building blocks, in a way, like we thinking about it is kind of a transition, right? Like it starts obviously with any blockchain, right? You need to have native currency because that's what allows you to kind of build all of the economics and incentives around. The next set of building blocks becomes the kind of open finance or DeFi, right? This is where DEXs come in. This is where oracles come in. This is where kind of derivatives and all of this like instruments come in. But I think one of the core instrument is stablecoin, because like I remember when I first, was telling like what I do to some of my friends from Google, and like blockchain for them was like a complete, no word. But when I started talking about the stablecoin, it was actually piqued their interest, because like that's something that they can understand how like now you have a digital kind of currency, which is like pegged to some value and is not like completely volatile. It's not about trading. It's actually about usage. And then now they can understand how like that can be embedded into different applications, right? So that kind of changes, like, small step changes already kind of the mindset of people. And then going forward, I think a lot of more kind of showcasing the composability, because I think like from perspective of a developer, like the value for developer to build on this is the fact that you can kind of build on top of this existing other platforms and rely that they will be there, right? Like you can come in and get all the data provided by, Chainlink, for example, and rely that it will be there, and, it will be obviously within, data provision accurate, versus like if you're trying to, partner with, for example, one data provider partner, right? That partner can go out of business tomorrow, and, that data feed will disappear. Right, so this is where like I don't know if, I mean, I'm sure there may be like something that will accelerate growth on developer side, but I think what in general is huge benefit is just having lots of these components that people can come in and really quickly build new things on top, right? So it's more like in a way it's like libraries, right? JavaScript right now is not about like how pretty the language is. It's about insane amount of libraries that you can use, right? Even Rust, for example, which is like pretty nascent and new language, like has like pretty huge number of libraries, for example, in blockchain space. And this is now like one of the de facto choices for building blockchain code, because like you have the standard libraries that you can use. So it's the same idea here in blockchains. Like if we have enough like set of components that I can build on top of my stuff, right? Like going from zero to, a marketplace that ensures the trades and, creates a derivative on top of it, like, and I can put this all in a weekend, that's like a completely different story, right? I cannot build something like this in like, without using these technologies, like in such a short time before.
So CZ, kind of helping bring a number of different token-based projects to mainstream. You're introducing them to a large number of people in a way. You kind of become a gateway to engaging with early adopters. To what extent do you think tokens are a point of friction to adoption versus, oh, we've lost him, versus an accelerant or an incentive that will drive adoption?
I think in most cases, tokens are an incentive. I think most people we see most projects who issue a token, well, I would say most good projects that are already successful, they have a good product. When they can issue a token, they typically are able to increase user engagement and user rewards. And if popular exchanges list them, they usually get a lot more users than when they didn't have a token. So I think tokens usually help. There is a learning curve for normal users, for people outside of crypto. Like sometimes they're kind of skeptical to sort of understand, say, BNB or Nazarov token. So there's a little bit of that learning curve there. But overall, I would say tokens are definitely far net positive.
Sergey, we were kind of talking a little bit about composability there, and I guess, you know, we've got a universe where there are lots of different stacks being built, some end to end, like Near, some kind of more organically in a kind of bottom up way. How can we increase interoperability between these networks and these technology stacks?
So I think the points that Illia made are pretty much spot on, where you're trying to get to a world where smart contract developers can build at the speed and quality that web developers build. And therefore they need this set of building blocks, which in the web world take the form of libraries, but in the decentralized world might take different forms. So that's one of those forms is what we work on, oracles, where we essentially put these different oracles or resources that represent discrete other resources in the traditional world, and we allow them to compose those building blocks with their contract. Now, the challenge that I see generally speaking with that and with all these other building blocks that people have is you're trying to marry security with a certain amount of usability by developers and then also by their end users. So you're trying to implement a system where you want developers to build an application using the same design patterns and at the same speeds that web developers can build, but you're trying to put them in an environment, in a situation where the security dynamics they're engaging in as developers and the security dynamics that they're providing their users is at a much higher level. And it's really the work of infrastructure providers or technology providers or platform providers like Near, like Chainlink, in many cases like Binance, so people can get introduced to the concept of value being in these systems, to make that interaction between security and speed and usability more fluid and easier for people to both do and understand. So in our case, what we've seen is that it's important that developers are able to build with a large breadth of different oracles that connect them to different resources. And the security guarantees of those oracles need to have a lot of depth, because the developers are concerned about the security of the application end to end, because the security of the application is now not just defined by the contract, but also by the oracle. And they want a large set of security guarantees overall for the contract end to end. But at the same time, we noticed that just like blockchains have block explorers, or exchanges have, funds or SAFU, or any number of other proofs that the system is working for the benefit of the users that the developer is building for, oracles also need to generate a lot of proof for users. So there's these both of these challenges where you want to properly connect the developer's creation to the real world, but you also want to do it in a way that generates all the information that a developer would want to show a user to make them comfortable enough to put another $1 million, or in more advanced situations, $1 billion into one of these decentralized applications. And I think that's the challenge we all face when building this infrastructure for these developers, but then subsequently for their users as well. So it's actually, there's a second order problem here where we have to make them be able to do this, but then we have to do it so well that they can prove to their users that they've done it correctly, that the security guarantees which they're seeking to provide are actually provided, which is actually a very impressive set of problems, because it's more advanced than just speed or usability. It's marrying these two dynamics, which is a very complex, interesting problem.
Yeah, so kind of linked to those trade-offs, you know, speed, usability, costs, and everything else. Obviously, there's this other dimension, security. There's often referred to a requirement for decentralization or a degree of decentralization. And obviously, again, you can look at that as a spectrum in a number of different ways. As teams that are innovating in this space, and certainly in some ways are regarded as startups, how important is decentralization, or when is it important? And that question is to Illia.
Yeah, so I mean, in our case, obviously, like, we're building a protocol, and decentralization is kind of the way the security is provided to all the applications that build on top. And it's not, it's kind of like, it's security, it's also kind of a lot of other properties that people expect from a blockchain, right? Like censorship resistance and like ability to operate, kind of like having validators and nodes and miners that are spread around the world pretty much kind of provides a way to like both engage the communities around the world and kind of onboard people, but also arbitrage in the way it sounds, the regulatory stuff. And so in our case, it's obviously like the most important part. The question there is like, can, you know, if we look at Bitcoin right now, right, this is probably the most decentralized network by far, but it didn't get there like that, right? It started with one computer and then two computers, and then, you know, grew over time. So it doesn't mean that you need to, you know, try to get to, you know, 100,000 nodes operating the network on the day one. So like our rollout plan, for example, is in stages, where right now, for example, we started kind of proof of authority network, which we operating and making sure everything works correctly. And in parallel, we have kind of testnet, which is operated by almost 100 validators around the world. Then we're going to onboard them to mainnet, kind of giving up the control to them. And then over time, as actually usage of the network grows, the number of participating nodes, right, will also grow. So like network will actually keep growing with the usage and require more nodes, need more nodes from the participants to actually maintain the load. And I think like in general, kind of, I think like all the new protocols are going that way, because like it is a way where you can like both roll out and test everything clearly, and at the same time you can make sure that like you like every time you go like fully decentralized, right, and you lose like ability to obviously change things, and you also lose ability to optimize for performance, right? So like, you know, the Bitcoin's number of nodes is the reason why we have like 10-minute blocks in Bitcoin, is because you need to wait until all of them get it. So like kind of you need to balance these two things. So and like finding a balance and finding like algorithm and data structures and everything to like get the best performance out of, you know, the largest amount of nodes you can get is, I think, the kind of question of like protocol development that we've been working on.
Great, thanks. So CZ, you know, you're one of the few companies in the space that can be regarded as a unicorn, you know, with the level of usage and scale that you've achieved. And so you're now on a different stage in the growth trajectory, where I assume you're kind of looking to grow the market, assume more market share, roll out new products. So you're in an enviable position of do you build, do you rent, or do you acquire? And I know there's some interesting topics in space. So, you know, how do you see growth through acquisition playing out in Web3?
Okay, I think it's even in Web3 or in crypto, it's no different than in traditional industries. I think whatever it's generally slightly cheaper to build yourself if you have the right team. Acquiring acqui-hires are usually slightly more expensive, but then you have less risk. Usually you can buy more mature products or mature platforms. So we're always open to both. So we're always looking at acquisition deals, acquiring, merging, or just partnering with other partners. And there's a lot of areas we also want to build ourselves. But I think we just crossed like 1,000 people now. So we're actually about 1,100 people. And we're actually dealing with the growth issues ourselves. So we've been growing pretty fast, but now we have to managing 1,000 people in a relatively decentralized manner is a challenge actually. So our organization structure is very different from traditional companies. We're not a true DAO, but so we're learning how to even once we acquire a company or a team or merge with a team, how do we work with them so that we achieve the maximum benefits? For we can continue to grow the products we acquire and somehow integrate them into the Binance ecosystem. So we're thinking about those things all the time, but I don't think fundamentally it's different. There is one big difference is when there's a token, what do you do after you acquire the company? What do you do with that token? It's kind of tricky. So do you merge that with your own token? The only sensible way is to buy all of it, and there's always a few guys that don't want to sell. So that part of the token economics is not really practiced out yet. So I think in the next few years we're going to see more acquisitions, and we're going to figure out how that part is going to work.
Great. Well, look, I know we have a hard stop at 15 past. So in the danger of having to cut somebody off midway through, I'm going to end there and also let Sergey get to bed. I'm very grateful that everybody joined. And I wish we had more time with this panel. It's one of those that I wish I had an hour plus. So let's see running the panel.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.